asking questions is one of the best ways to improve your leadership. I'm Jen Whitmer, and I help teams and leaders solve conflict and personality clashes. So, why am I talking about questions? So, here's a quick story, and then I'm going to talk about why these questions are important and where these questions come from. And so a couple weeks ago, my parents were in town and we're sitting around the kitchen table waiting for some things to happen, just chatting, my husband and my mom and me. And we're talking, and my mom says this statement, and she's like, my grandkids will never be able to read my handwriting because they don't teach cursive in schools anymore. Now, this statement um, could be construed a lot of different ways. Let's say it like that. And so rather than kind of start arguing about why I disagree with that statement or think that statement is wrong or think that statement is right, doesn't really matter. Rather than jumping in, I want to seek to understand first. And that's why questions are powerful. So I started asking my mom a series of questions. They're simple questions, but these three questions are a way to process and filter, especially in a conflict when things can be a little bit intense and your emotions start to rise and you just get really activated because you need something to grab onto. So I started asking my mom these questions. And one of them was, oh, really? What are the reasons you think that? Why do you think the kids won't be able to read cursive, or why do you think schools don't teach cursive anymore? Just why do you think that? She started sharing that. And I was like, how do you feel about that? How does that strike you? What are your emotions around that? And so she's answering, and then kind of what do you want to do about that? How do you want that to go? And so we had this conversation back and forth. I am going to be honest, it wasn't super comfortable. But because it was such a low stakes thing. This wasn't um a huge, difficulty in the world of me and my mom. It was an opportunity to practice the skill of asking questions. So if you are watching live or if you are catching the replay, I would love to know if you've ever been in that situation where there is this tension and somebody says a statement that just hits you the wrong way or you totally disagree and you jump in rather than asking questions. Has that ever happened to you? It happens to me all the time. And I have to remember that those three question buckets help me to understand. So, why in the world is that important? Why are these three questions? What do you think? How do you feel? And what do you want to do so valuable in our leadership? Well, one of the things that questions do is they fight assumptions. And in a disagreement, in any kind of conflict, it might be not even a knockdown drag out, but somebody walks into your office or hits you up on Slack and says, here's what we have to do next. Here is the right course of action. And you're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I disagree. Rather than jumping in with I disagree, understand why they think that, understand what their emotions are around that, and understand what they want to do more than just that one statement. So when you can disagree safely, that is a sign of psychological safety. It's also a way to build trust because you're seeking first to understand. You've probably heard that phrase before, but how do we do that? Well, you ask these three questions because questions lead to greater understanding. So back to this, simple story with me and my mom about cursive. It would be really easy for me to assume what my mom thinks and why. But through these questions, I started to understand that this was something that she had heard, that she was curious or concerned about historical things. She was concerned about how students interact with older generations. There were all these concerns that she had. Those were not the assumptions that I had around this topic of kids learning cursive. Now, I had my own opinions, but it helped me to understand what she was thinking. We could disagree well. And again, part of disagreeing well is building psychological safety on your team. It's part of understanding how to lead better. Because when you don't assume and you draw out these questions, what do you think? how do you feel, and what do you want to do, you get information that is not only broad, but deep. You're getting this full circle picture around what is really happening in this conversation, in the team, within a project, all of those things. And when you have greater understanding, then you can get more wisdom and context and make better choices. And when you're creating trust on a team, that instantly improves your leadership. Leadership is built on relationships, and relationships absolutely have to have trust. And so these questions will lead you into greater trust. And so the way you can go about this is you can ask these three questions just straight out. What do you think? How do you feel? What do you want to do? But you can also ask around them to get you the same idea. If you think about those as categories. So in the category of what do you think, you're asking questions like, oh, what are the reasons you have come to that conclusion? What are your data points? What information do you have? Where did you get that information? Help me understand your reasoning process. All of those are questions in the area of what do you think? When you're talking about emotions, again, you can straight ask, how do you feel about this? But you can also ask things like, hey, tell me more about your feelings right now. What types of emotions are you experiencing? And how do you feel about this decision? What are the emotional implications of this decision? You can come around that in several different ways, but you're always getting to what do you feel? And I'm going to stop for just a second because I have heard this come out of leaders' mouths. We just need to leave emotions out of that. And I have to tell you, not only is that dangerous, it is not going to get you what you want because we are feeling beings who think and move. Emotions are a part of every decision that we make. They're a part of every situation. So we can ignore them and pretend they're not there. And then they have this huge outside influence. Or we can acknowledge them and deal with them. Brene Brown says we can spend a reasonable amount of time dealing with the fears and failures of people, or we can squander an unreasonable amount of time dealing with the bad behaviors that result from those feelings. So emotions are an important part. And if you don't understand how someone feels, you don't know that they're disappointed and you assume that they are angry, you won't make good decisions. So how do you feel is a really important question in your leadership. And then the third one is, what do you want to do? So you can ask that as, what's your best plan of action? What do you think should be the next step? How do you think we should go about making this possible? All those types of questions that lead to action are the what do you want to do questions. So those three types of questions, what do you think, how do you feel, and what do you want to do, really help us get the context, helps us build that psychological safety and trust, and helps us make better choices in building the team. So one of the reasons I talk about these three types of questions, I talk about it in my TED Talk, and when I'm working with my clients, my coaching clients, we talk about how do you put this into a framework to make better choices and to listen better. But the reason I use these three questions is because the Enneagram teaches about these three centers of intelligence. Again, we're not just thinking beings who feel, we are feeling beings who think and act. And when you have one center of intelligence that's kind of taking over, so if your thought is the only thing that's happening and you never do or feel, you're not going to be very balanced. And if you're only feeling and you're just feeling and feeling and feeling and you're never doing or thinking about those things, you're not going to be very effective. And you just do, and you never plan or strategize or feel about it, you're also not going to be effective. And in the Enneagram, it teaches about these three centers of intelligence. This is ancient wisdom that if you Google the three centers of intelligence, you're going to see it in Forbes magazine and in ancient literature. So that tells me that this has been around a long time. And also in my study and experience, I know that these three centers of intelligence, when we use all three, we're evenly balanced like a three-legged stool. We have more trust, we make better decisions, and we feel more peaceful about what's happening because everything is working equally rather than one trying to be this really strong arm and the other one being really weak and being out of balance, not only with ourselves, but with others. So that's why we use those three types of questions. And those three questions, how do you think, or what do you think, how do you feel, and what do you want to do? You can ask them of yourself before you make a decision, but it's also the questions you can ask in the middle of a discussion that feels a little bit like conflict that you're not quite sure how to move forward through. It keeps you from making assumptions. So I get back to that story with my mom. I could have made a ton of assumptions. Instead, we had this conversation back and forth. And what was fascinating is she started to understand what I was saying too. She started to come back with more questions toward me. And when you start to question in a healthy way and in a posture of curiosity, that's when we bring understanding. That's when we start to understand, oh, that is what you think. That is not at all. Well, I think this too. You start to find the commonalities, and that curiosity leads you to better decisions, better actions, better relationships, which improves your leadership. So I hope that was helpful. Sometimes when I talk about these questions, all of the different situations that you're in start to fire. You're like, oh my gosh, this thing that I have coming up, I've got this meeting, or I've got to have a conversation with this person. And I would love to talk to you about that. So if you ever want to just like, hey, I want to talk through this, like, how do I ask these questions, and want to just have a little free coaching session about it, feel free. Whoop, there are you. There it is. Yay. Just talk with me, schedule a time. It says it's about coaching, and it gives you a little questionnaire to ask, and you can set up some time with me where we can just talk through that and help you learn how to apply these three questions so you aren't insecure and you feel heard. You're not feeling lonely about it. You feel like someone's in your corner. That confidence that comes from having practiced it a little bit and having an outside voice helping you along the way. And I would love to be that for you. So schedule some time. I would love to talk to you about these three questions. And even if you don't schedule some time, I would love to hear. My little challenge to you is I want you to try this. Ask these three questions. What do you think? How do you feel? What do you want to do? And see how it goes. See, I want to hear your story about what happened in a conversation when you started asking these questions. You got curious, and how you made and built better trust and made better decisions. So ask these three questions. They will start to transform your conversations, and they will start to improve your leadership. All right. Have a great Monday, and I will see you all next week right here from Monday Mentor at 1 p.m. Eastern.